One small step. HAAN primarily focuses on alternative news. He has a YouTube channel called HAAN through which he aims to wake everyone up with his endless stream of various conspiracy theories. He targets a specific niche on the internet with a particular audience that is not very large or broadly represented in society, especially considering the subject HAAN primarily focuses on the flat earth. He has already lost a few channels that were blocked or censored due to the controversial topics he covers in his show. A common thread in all of his shows is always the hidden elite that holds all the strings in the background. It's the big bankers who own everything and thus control everything. We can say that HAAN has developed a rather dark worldview with all his conspiracy theories. This has led him to isolate himself from society to some extent. However, a change occurs when a new virus emerges worldwide, characterized by an enormous fear campaign through major media and the political figures of the hidden elite. At that moment, his channel becomes highly relevant in the discussion as he involves himself in every topic daily. Then, something incredible happens. It all takes off like a bomb. He is embraced by the public, and his channel grows immensely. Soon, he has around 10,000 followers here and 5,000 followers there, with the shows being viewed tens of thousands of times. It's unprecedented. The rebellious attitude towards the government and the mistrust of their plans seem to resonate with the Dutch population. This leads HAAN into the world of alternative media, and he gets to know many names in that world. But it doesn't take long for more and more unusual and remarkable things to happen. Things that HAAN believes cannot be genuine and suspects are rigged. He is regularly seen with everyone in the media world at demonstrations and in The Hague. And the more he is there, the more he realizes that it's all actually one big theatrical performance, including the entire resistance to which he passionately tries to contribute. However, it turns out that everyone around him is, one by one, deceivers, and he discusses this in his shows in a way that seems to have a very remarkable effect. He calls it his magic wand moment because with his statements, he can apparently determine who or what is present at a demonstration. Channels with tens of thousands of followers go dark on the same day if he mentions something like that in his show. And this doesn't happen just once. It happens consistently. HAAN has now realized that in addition to a hidden elite in the background, there is also a sort of hidden ground force working to sustain this scum. According to his idea, there are hundreds of secret agents in the field working to shape this entire media campaign. These are not elite bankers or the like, or other wealthy individuals. These are people like you and me, everyday people, but cut from a very different cloth and of a different caliber. Because we are indeed citizens, as it turns out. HAAN was not aware of this initially. However, during his early days in The Hague, he was confronted with the fact that there are quite a few peculiarities in this paperwork. Things like having an ID card or being required to possess a birth certificate, the maritime legislation, and all the controversy surrounding it. Naturally, this was delightful conspiracy material for his ears, and he delved into it, turning it inside out. One thing is certain, regardless of what he had tattooed on his left hand, honesty prevails, and the truth must come to light. He could determine that the rest had different intentions. He had genuinely believed all that time in The Hague that people were shaping resistance in the Netherlands, and it was already not a very large group on which everything depended. So, it was an incredible disappointment when it turned out to be a complete fabrication. Because hidden hands in the Netherlands, who have a whole army of computer IT specialists, secret agents, troublemakers, alluring women, friendly folks, NLP experts, they all become your best friends, but they all want one thing: to sabotage you as quickly as possible and try to force you to stop. Force you to stop talking about the truth, and for that, they used literally all means. Serious criminal activities were planned to try to involve HAAN in them. When there was no real progress in the project they wanted him to be part of, they began to transparently increase the pressure. setting off more alarm bells for Chris HAAN. One by one, he managed to identify all his harassers from a distance and publicly dealt with these disruptive elements. But to get in and gain the trust to control Chris HAAN, people had to be sent to him repeatedly. They could only gain trust by giving him information. Information that resonated. In other words, that contained a significant part of the truth. A truth he hadn't heard before. That was the only way to get through to him. In his extensive journey of exposing such clients, he managed to gather a massive amount of information. Dozens of gigabytes of data, recorded conversations, photos, threats, reports, and so on. There were even national cases, and the police were involved. People were convicted for it. It was a tumultuous time, but HAAN still persisted. By now, it was his 5th channel, but still with a few thousand loyal followers, he had a platform large enough to continue dominating, or at least being present, on platforms like YouTube and others. This meant that in the world of alternative media, they had to come up with a counter-narrative. He discussed topics that led to the most transparent combinations in alternative media. Podcasts started to deviate significantly by inviting specific guests to align with the subjects Chris HAAN covered. And we all know what Chris HAAN's favorite subject was, and that was exactly the topic from which more and more anti-content had to emerge from Dutch soil. Chris HAAN's flat earth message had become too prominent. However, what he couldn't possibly have comprehended and realized at the time was that on his 40th birthday, the first AI chatbot became publicly accessible, ChatGPT. It soon became clear to him what an incredibly handy tool and invention this was. The chatbots turned out to be the ultimate interface with the data on the internet, but also an incredibly tireless opponent regarding the flat earth. To put an end to the discussion once and for all, Chris HAAN decided to fully substantiate the science of the flat earth, as he had it in his mind, in a way that was grounded in physics, mathematics, and was more plausible than all current scientific models. After a month of chatting and refining day and night, he had his first major breakthrough. Chris HAAN had no background education or experience in physical processes or anything of the sort. He had always had an affinity or a passion for it, but wasn't formally trained and hadn't pursued it beyond high school. However, through his intense year-long study, he began to better understand the processes carried out in science. He started to grasp why certain studies needed to be conducted and what certain concepts truly meant. This allowed him to create a complete picture of his flat earth model and how it could be explained scientifically. This became possible through the introduction of the concept of the monopole, which became the mechanism that made his entire scientific model plausible and also provided a genuine understanding of what was actually happening in the field of physics. However, this led to an even more profound realization and shock. Chris HAAN wanted to know the truth, and he had now stumbled upon it. He could piece it together and recognize it by connecting multiple studies and various domains, revealing a rather sinister underlying scheme. The Earth is indeed flat and not rotating, was his conclusion. He had thoroughly built his case, and it still holds today. The current scientific models fall far short. He discovered that we're in the Earth, but that wasn't the end of it. He discovered that the Earth was actually a cosmic accident and, as a result, was subject to entropy and an end-time scenario. He found that the Earth's magnetic field was on the verge of a dramatic reversal, which would lead to the end of all biological life. But even that wasn't the most shocking thing he eventually uncovered. He discovered who the hidden hands truly were and what humanity had actually been all this time. This revelation placed the entire history as a fully scripted version where it belongs. History is written by the winners, and the winners chose to write themselves out of history thousands of years ago, masking themselves in mythology. He discovered that Atlantis truly existed and had sunk much more recently than people think. Its origin, or in fact continuation, was mainly centered in the Netherlands. Thus, the VOC Golden Age became the equivalent or relaunch of the Golden Age of the Atlanteans, and through humanism in the early Middle Ages, the Latin language was suddenly brought back to life from the Netherlands. That was the academic language of the Atlanteans, an interesting fact that Chris de Haan had already noticed in his extensive studies of old Dutch texts. Everything was, of course, written in Latin. He also gained more clarity on this, and, in the end, the most shocking information became evident to him. He discovered that remnants of the Atlantic colonies' islands still existed. It also revealed the hidden history of Atlantean culture, which was crafted to keep a real people out of the spotlight, originating from an island near a region known only in mythology. I'm talking about the islands of Friesland, Thule, and the Hyperborea region. These had completely disappeared from all maps, and even in mythology, it was claimed they didn't exist. Chris de Haan stumbled upon this island group while investigating the origins of the sect members chasing him. He noticed that the sect was very paranoid about their own disguises and their interactions with the common people. The reason behind this was the final revelation that became clear to him, and it made him scratch his head more than a few times. Elaborated in medieval alchemical works is a questionable concept that has its origins in a different form in Atlantis. It's the idea of the little man trapped in a bottle, a small artificial being. The homunculus, often depicted as a peacock in a bottle, it represents the ego consciousness. Chris de Haan began to realize that in the 1600s-1700s, they had reached the centrally located monopole pot of our world, and they had been manipulating this element ever since. A monopole also generates consciousness, and through alchemical trickery, they had managed to replicate a piece of this monopole. They created humanity as a homunculus, Adam. This gave birth to an ego consciousness that radiates a complete universe of its own. This introduced a new heavy body into the original binary black and white singularity systems that generate the universe. When they introduced a second homunculus, Eva, everything went wrong. The entire system collapsed. It became a system of 2 black holes and 1 white hole, a problematic configuration that had to reset itself every 150 years to survive. The first collapse caused the flood on Earth and disconnected the system from the network. The creators of the homunculus, now the Atlanteans, giants for us, were trapped with their own creation. After the flood, they, for us, the human homunculus, became the Atlanteans, gigantic titans. They were highly advanced and had developed culture. The survivors soon resettled across the world. They built magnificent architecture that seems oversized to us. After 1,000 years, the generations of Atlanteans were entirely mixed with the homunculus colony, yet they maintained the bloodlines and the hidden hands. The big money still flows in the same direction. So maybe nothing has changed since the pirate era, until Chris de Haan came along. Through his quest for the truth, he spiritually awakened in the right context. He learned to recognize his higher consciousness and realized he was guided by a high power. Since then, de Haan has become increasingly intriguing, and the battle for the end time is far from over.